Lesson 1. Washington's Presidency. George Washington was inaugurated in New York City on April 30th, 1789. A presidential inauguration is the ceremony in which the president officially takes the oath of office. A witness reported that the new president looked grave, almost to sadness. Washington, no doubt, felt a great burden. He knew that Americans were looking to him to make the new government work. Get ready to read. Startup. President Washington reviews his troops before the Whiskey Rebellion. Write a prediction about events during Washington's presidency. Guiding questions. What steps did President Washington take to set up the government of the new republic? What were the causes and effects of the Whiskey Rebellion? What was the impact of Washington's foreign policy outlined in his farewell address? Vocabulary. Inauguration. Precedent. Cabinet. Bond. Tariff. Speculator. Neutral. Academic vocabulary. Accordingly. Invoke.
Okay, if you are listening to this and not just looking for the answers, we are only going to cover guiding question 1 this week. And we are going to get through the vocabulary: inauguration, precedent, cabinet, bond, tariff, and speculator. Only the first guiding question this week.
How did Washington shape the American presidency? Washington's presidency marked the beginning of what historians call the early republic. This period between 1789 and about 1825 began when the first U.S. government was formed under the Constitution. Decisions made during the early republic had a lasting impact on the institutions and culture of the United States. As the first president, Washington showed his strong leadership and set an example for future generations. The Constitution provided a framework for the new government of the United States. It did not explain how the president should govern from day to day. "There is scarcely any part of my conduct," he said, "which may not hereafter be drawn into precedent." A precedent is an act or a decision that sets an example for others to follow. Washington set an important precedent at the end of his second term. In 1796, he decided not to run for a third term. Not until 1940 did any president seek a third term. The first cabinet. The Constitution says little about how the executive branch should be organized. It was clear, however, that the president needed talented people to help him carry out his duties. In 1789, the first Congress created 5 executive departments. They were the departments of State, Treasury, and War, and the offices of Attorney General and Postmaster General. The heads of these departments made up the president's cabinet. Members of the cabinet gave Washington advice and were responsible for directing their departments. As a proven leader himself, Washington knew he needed to appoint others with similar qualities to his cabinet. He needed effective leaders who had the ability to persuade others to adopt new proposals and implement his ideas. Washington set a precedent by choosing well-known leaders to serve in his cabinet. The 2 most influential cabinet members were the Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson, and the Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton. Establishing a court system. The Constitution calls for a Supreme Court. Congress, however, had to set up the federal court system. As one of its first actions, Congress passed the Judiciary Act of 1789. It called for the Supreme Court to consist of 1 Chief Justice and 5 Associate Justices. Today, the Supreme Court has 8 Associate Justices because Congress later amended the Judiciary Act. Washington named John Jay the first Chief Justice of the United States. The Judiciary Act also set up a system of district courts and circuit courts across the nation. Decisions made in these lower courts could be appealed to the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land. Reading check. Identify main ideas. Why was the cabinet created? How did Alexander Hamilton deal with national debt? As Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton faced many problems. Among the most pressing was the large national debt. This is the total amount of money that a government owes to others. During the Revolution, both the national government and individual states had desperately needed money. They had borrowed heavily from foreign countries and ordinary citizens to pay soldiers and buy supplies. Then, as now, governments borrowed money by issuing bonds. A bond is a certificate that promises to repay the money loaned, plus interest, on a certain date. For example, if a person pays $100 for a bond, the government agrees to pay back $100 plus interest, an additional sum of money, by a certain time. A plan to reduce the debt. Hamilton wanted to pay off the government's debts and create a stable economic system for the United States. The plan he proposed showed that cabinet members could provide strong leadership. Hamilton called for the government to repay both federal and state debts. His first act in government was to ask Congress to pass a tariff or tax on imports to pay for the government. Congress passed this tariff in 1789. Hamilton wanted the government to buy up all the bonds issued by both the national and state governments before 1789. He then planned to issue new bonds to pay off the old debts. As the economy improved and income from the tariff increased, the government would then be able to pay off the new bonds. Many people, including bankers and investors, welcomed Hamilton's plan. Others attacked it. Hamilton's plan. James Madison led the opposition. Madison argued that Hamilton's plan rewarded speculators. A speculator is someone who invests in a risky venture in the hope of making a large profit. During the Revolution, the government had issued bonds to soldiers and citizens who supplied goods. Many of these bondholders needed cash to survive and sold their bonds to speculators. Speculators bought bonds worth $1 for only 10 or 15 cents. If the government paid off the old bonds in full, speculators stood to make fortunes. Madison thought that speculators did not deserve to profit. Hamilton replied that the United States must repay its debts in full. The support of investors, he argued, was crucial to building the new nation's economy. Primary source. To justify and preserve their confidence, to promote the increasing respectability of the American name, to answer the calls of justice, to restore landed property to its due value, to furnish new resources both to agriculture and commerce, to cement more closely the union of the states. These are the great and invaluable ends to be secured for the support of public credit. Alexander Hamilton Report on Public Credit, January 9, 1790. After much debate, Congress approved full repayment of the national debt. As a Southerner, Madison also led the fight against the other part of Hamilton's plan, the repaying of state debts. By 1789, most Southern states had paid off their debts from the Revolution. They thought that other states should do the same. The New England states, for example, still owed a lot. Thus, some northern states stood to gain more than others from the plan. As a result, the southern states bitterly opposed Hamilton's plan. This fight over how to use scarce resources was only one of many in the early republic. To make government work, there were compromises. Reaching a compromise. In the end, Hamilton proposed a compromise. Many Southerners wanted the nation's capital to be located in the South. Hamilton offered to support that goal if Southerners agreed to his plan to repay state debts. Madison and others accepted the compromise. In July 1790, Congress voted to repay state debts and to build a new capital city. The new capital would not be part of any state. Instead, it would be built along the Potomac River, on land given up by two Southern states, Virginia and Maryland. Congress called the area the District of Columbia. Washington, the new capital, would be located in the district. Today, it is known as Washington, D.C., with D.C. standing for District of Columbia. Plans called for the new capital to be ready by 1800. Meanwhile, the nation's capital was moved from New York to Philadelphia. Reading check. Identify cause and effect. Why were federal and state debts so high?
Okay, the federal and state debts were so high because they had to borrow a lot of money during the Revolutionary War. It's a quick, easy answer. I want to talk about these graphs for a second. So this chart, the U.S. financial problem, 1789-1791, it shows that the United States made $4.4 million in that time period, and it cost $4.3 million to run the government. They made $100,000. Now, the government's not there to make money, but that's not a lot of money. If you look down at the bottom, the U.S. owes $77.2 million. Real quickly and simply, even without understanding interest totally, you should understand they're never going to pay off this debt if things keep going this way. That's why Alexander Hamilton was so aggressive about this plan. Now, another thing, they say in here that the southern states had paid off their debts. Well, it says most southern states have paid off their debts. And so the North stood to gain a lot because they had not. Now, I'm not saying that's wrong, but what I'm saying is these are the southern states and these are the northern states. Let's see if I can draw in here. Okay, no, I can't. Everything from Maryland on down is a southern state. And I did the math real quickly. It's, according to this chart, about $10.6 million is what the North owes, and about 10.9 is what the southern states owe for their individual debts. There's two different things. There's the federal debt, the United States in general, and then each state has their own money they owe. But here, these southern states on this list owe more than the northern states on this list. The problem is, I guess, if you look at it, there's 2 or 3 southern states that are not on here, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm not really sure what's going on here because this chart tells a different story than what we've always been told. But anyways, what you need to understand, according to this paragraph, is that the southern states, they didn't owe as much money as the North, and they thought it was very unfair because they were going to end up having to pay some of the northern debt. The North thought it was a great idea. Oh, and that's it.